Hello and welcome back. It's Jennifer McGuire. Today I'm here with another alcohol ink video. I've done quite a few of these lately, but I'm just really impressed with the different techniques you can do with this ink, so you can really stretch this product far. Today I'm sharing how to add details to your alcohol inked background, just so you can have some more variation or kind of change up the results that you get. I have several examples for you, and at the end of this video, I'll share with you my alcohol ink swatches so you can see all of the colors, and I'll also give you a link to the free swatch download in case you want to create your own. Okay, let's start creating some backgrounds first. I'm using a Ranger alcohol ink tool set. This includes a little mist bottle and some brushes, and I'll use those with my background today. In this bottle, I'm putting rubbing alcohol that I can spray onto my inked surfaces. Do not put the Ranger ink blending solution into this because you do not want to spray that, but instead you can use rubbing alcohol. Okay, so I have Yupo paper ready to go, and I have chosen some alcohol ink colors that I like, and I have them listed across the top. I am just randomly squeezing drops of these different alcohol inks onto my Yupo paper. After I put down colors, I'm squirting a little bit of the blending solution over the background. This helps to get the ink moving so that you can create beautiful backgrounds. I'm using a straw to blow air onto it to kind of move the color around. You can use other tools to spray the air. I know like there's hand puffers and such, but I like the control that I can get by blowing air through a straw. I also like to move color around with a brush. Next, I'm going to spritz this with alcohol. Now watch, as you spritz it, it really changes the look. While this is very wet, I'm going to move that color around with the straw and by blowing air, and you can also use a brush if you want to. The higher you mist the alcohol onto your paper, the less dramatic of a look you'll get. After I let this dry, I decided that area over on the right was a little boring, so I am spritzing it with some alcohol from pretty high up, a few feet up, and also tapping on some big drips. That just adds some detail to the background. Okay, here's another background that I'm creating. Here I am putting down a few different colors of pink, and I'm also adding a rose gold mixative. Now this rose gold mixative that I'm about to add, it comes out, the mixative is very metallic. You have to shake it really good first, and you can see that it doesn't really blend out or move on its own. You really need to move it either with a brush or by adding the air. But this creates a fun metallic look that catches the light very nicely. I apologize for getting my head in front of the camera, but it really helps to change the direction of the air that you apply to it. Helps to move the inks around in various directions. Okay, so I'll set that aside to dry, and after it dried, I decided I wanted to add more detail to that. So even though this was dry, I'm misting it with some of that alcohol in the mist bottle, and you can see how it changes up the look, adds a lot to the background. Again, you're only misting a little bit on here. If you mist too much, you'll lose a lot of your pattern, and you can also flick little drops of rubbing alcohol on it. Again, you do not want to put the blending solution in your mist bottle because it contains, I think, like a resin that you don't want to make airborne. So instead, just use rubbing alcohol. Okay, here's another background. This time I'm applying the color kind of in diagonal stripes. I'm going to try to control it in that look. So after applying color, I put some blending solution right onto my glass mat. And I'm using a brush to apply that blending solution. That helps me control the movement a little bit and add more where I want to add more. You can see how this ink moves across the paper. It's just absolutely beautiful. By the way, I'm working on the Tim Holtz Media Mat, which is glass and excellent for quick cleanup of alcohol inks. All I do is use hand sanitizer and it cleans it right up. Now here I'm adding some details in with the thin alcohol ink brush. It's just a regular brush, but one that I have set aside for alcohol ink. I'm dipping it into rubbing alcohol, and I'm just kind of painting it here and there very lightly onto the background. This forces the ink to move and adds some fun details and a little bit of variation. Now if you want even smaller details, you can use a toothpick. So what I like to do is dip the toothpick into rubbing alcohol and add little dots here and there. You can use blending solution for this, but I find that the rubbing alcohol helps to move the ink a little bit more so you can see the results a bit better. I also wanted to add some metallic details to this background, so I have my Tim Holtz gold alcohol ink here. This is the gold mixative. I put some onto a piece of scrap plastic, and I'm dipping the little toothpick into the gold and adding dots to my background. And I'm kind of working along the pattern that I've already created there. And here you can see all the detail that I added to that background. It really changes the look significantly. Now, this idea of adding details to these alcohol ink backgrounds works even if they're dry. I created this pink and orange background weeks ago, decided that it was a little boring, so I wanted to add some detail. So I misted on some rubbing alcohol and added a few drops here and there, and it really brings that background to life and adds a lot more interest. Here was one that I really didn't like at all. It was just too red, but by adding some rubbing alcohol to it, I am able to bring out some of the pink that is also in it. Okay, now that we have a bunch of alcohol ink backgrounds, wanted to show you some fun and fast ways to use them on cards. For this pair of cards that I'm about to make, I'm using the SugarPea Starburst Cover Plate Die. That's a mouthful. I'm cutting it from both white cardstock and from my alcohol ink background. Yupo paper die cuts beautifully. Now I'm putting a piece of double-sided tape on the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card. I'm covering the entire front with that double-sided adhesive. Next, I'm going to add that white die cut right on the front of it so that anything open and exposed is adhesive, so I can easily inlay my alcohol ink pieces into it. Then I will be able to use the negative space of my alcohol ink background on another card. So now it's time to put the puzzle together and just take the pieces of alcohol ink and pop them right into place right on the front of my card. Again, all those open areas are exposed adhesive, so this really doesn't take long at all. Next, I can use the other piece of the alcohol ink background, add some strong liquid adhesive to the back of it, and put that onto the front of another 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. So we're making two backgrounds or two cards out of that one alcohol inked piece. Now for the sentiments, I'm using an older SugarPea stamp set. This one has some really fun sentiments that I thought really went well with the unique alcohol inked backgrounds. I'm using the You're Awesome on these two particular cards. I'm using my MISTI stamping tool to add the stamping since I'm making multiple cards. So first I stamped the You're Awesome in the center of this with some ink that I didn't like. So you can see it's messed up there. So I'm totally covering it up with a circle die cut. Just wanted to show you that I make mistakes all the time in crafting, and sometimes you just have to hide them. So I added that white die cut right on top, and I'm stamping that with Hero Art's Ultra Pink ink, and I double stamped it so it was darker. Next, I used my anti-static powder tool, and I stamped it again with VersaMark ink, which is clear and sticky, so that I can add Hero Art's White Satin Pearl Embossing Powder. This is a beautiful embossing powder that turns whatever color is behind it into a beautiful satin kind of shimmery look. So I removed the circle, added some foam tape behind it, and put it right on the front of the card, and nobody will ever know there's a mistake behind it. Now on the other card, I used my anti-static powder tool, stamped the sentiment with VersaMark ink, and added white embossing powder. Now when you heat set this, be very careful because Yupo paper will warp a bit. Just be sure not to keep the heat in one place too long. Okay, so next I wanted to add more detail to the alcohol inked pieces. Since I'm not embellishing these cards, I really feel that the detail in those alcohol inked pieces makes a big difference. So I'm adding more little dots of rubbing alcohol. You could even add more mixative if you wanted to. You can see the rose gold shimmer in the background of these alcohol ink pieces. So here are the final two cards. I really like using a large background die with my alcohol ink background so I can create two cards at once. And thankfully, because there's so much interest in those alcohol ink pieces, I don't have to add any embellishments to these, so they come together very quickly. Here's another pair of cards that I made with the same Starburst die. I took an older orange and red alcohol ink background that I created, die cut it, and created the two cards. On one, I used the SugarPea Celebration die, And on the other, I used the Hello Beautiful from that same stamp set that I showed you earlier. Okay, I have another example of a pair of cards made with an alcohol ink background. This time I'm using the SugarPea large striped cover plate, and I'm cutting it from both white cardstock and an alcohol inked background. Now, if you don't have large background dies, you can use any dies that you may have, maybe repeat die cut to cover a whole background if you wanted to. I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card. This time I'm using Stick It adhesive sheet, and I'm covering the front of the card with that adhesive. You can use any double-sided adhesive for this. Next, I'll add the white die cut to the front of it. And remember, any areas exposed will be adhesive, so I can easily pop the pieces in place and do a die cut inlay technique. For the sentiment on this card, I use the SugarPea Thanks die. I've used this one in videos in the past. I really like the style of it. I die cut the word thanks from an alcohol inked background scrap, and then also 2 from white cardstock. And I'm stacking those together with liquid adhesive so that there's some dimension to it. I like that the top one is an alcohol inked piece, so it matches the background nicely. Underneath it, I'm stamping a sentiment from a Sympathy stamp set actually, which I'll show you in a bit. I'm using my MISTI Creative Corner, which is that L-shaped plastic piece, to help me make sure that the sentiment is straight as I put it into my MISTI stamping tool. This time I'm just stamping with black ink right underneath, and there we have that finished card. Now on the other piece of the Yupo paper, I want to white heat emboss the same sentiment. I'm using my anti-static powder tool, stamping with VersaMark ink, and adding white embossing powder. This time I'm doing the embossing before I add it to a card because I find that I have less warping if the Yupo paper is by itself. Again, just keep the heat moving and don't hold it in one place too long. I'm adding this to another note card, and then I added the thanks sentiment that's die cut and stacked 3 times, right above our stamp sentiment. Here I'm adding some details to some of the plain alcohol inked pieces with a toothpick and some rubbing alcohol. Now this background was created with Pool, Patina, and Citrus alcohol inks. I also added the Pearl Mixative, so that's why you see a little bit of shimmer in that background. Check out all those little dots of detail that I created by misting with the alcohol and adding little dots with the toothpick. Here's another set of cards. This is the background that I made at the beginning of the video. For this one, I gold heat embossed a Sympathy sentiment from SugarPea Designs. And then I added detail again with little dots of alcohol. Here I again used the thanks sentiment with the Sending You My Love from that Sympathy stamp set that I used on the other card. Okay, so let's create a completely different design, one that is really good for kind of showcasing your alcohol inked backgrounds. For this one, I used the SugarPea Card Front Element Builder dies. There are lots of dies in here that are great for creating a card where the background is the showcase. I will also be using the SugarPea Sympathy Die that you see on the bottom there. You can also see the Thanks and the Celebrate that I used earlier in this video. And finally, here is the Heartfelt Sympathy stamp set that I mentioned earlier. Now this is a beautiful Sympathy set. It's just very classy and elegant, and there are many sentiments in here that are great for Sympathy cards. I struggle with Sympathy cards, so I'm always happy to find a set that makes it easier for me to make them. I'm trimming this alcohol inked background down to 4 1/4 inches wide, and I'll use that die from the Card Builder die set that I just showed you to cut this angled edge. It also cuts some faux stitching along it. Next, I'm cutting a piece of white craft foam that is just a little bit smaller than our alcohol ink piece. I'll glue this behind it before adding it to my card. That way it has nice, even raised dimension and won't get squished in the card. I find the easiest way to adhere the craft foam between the pieces and the card is to use a liquid adhesive, such as this Gina Connect adhesive. Just be sure to put something heavy on it while it dries. Here I'm stamping the sentiment along that angled edge, and then I have stacked 3 white Sympathy die cuts on top of each other, and I'll glue that along the edge. I like how this kind of hangs over the stamp sentiment. Next, I'm adding a few more details in some of the more simple areas along the edge. using the toothpick and some rubbing alcohol, and I added more dots of the gold mixative. Very simple design, but I think it works great for a sympathy card. Here is another card that's very similar. This time I used the curved die from that same SugarPea die set, and it again has that faux stitching. And then I stamped the sentiment at a little bit of an arch underneath. Okay, my next two cards are definitely my favorite. They're fun and colorful, and I made them using my scraps of alcohol inked background that I left over from this video. So here I have the background die, and I'm taking some of my little scrap pieces and taping them onto the die, and then I'll run them through my die cut machine. This will cut little pieces that I can inlay onto my card. So instead of letting all those little pieces of scrap go to waste, I'm going to cut them up so that I can fit them into the background like a puzzle. Here's another example that I created using this technique. So here's the die. You can see I taped a bunch of pieces of colorful alcohol ink down onto the die. I'll run it through my machine, and then I have little pieces that I can put into my inlay card. Now I have to do this a few times to cut all of the pieces, but I was able to make these cards each in about 10 minutes, so it's definitely worth it because you end up with lots of colorful alcohol inked background pieces with lots of detail to them. This simple design is a great way to use up any scraps that you don't want to part with. Okay, before we go, I thought I would show you a look at my swatch book of the Tim Holtz alcohol inks. There are many beautiful colors, and I will have a free download over on my blog so that you can make your own swatches if you want to. I printed the swatches downloads onto white cardstock, and then I cut small pieces of Yupo paper that I glued to each of them, and that's where I put the sample of color. I wanted to see what the color looked like on Yupo paper. I also put a drop of each color on a scrap piece of Yupo paper, let it dry, and then use a hole punch to punch a little circle that I will glue to the top of each bottle. That way, when I'm looking at my bottles, I can quickly see the color that is inside. Sometimes it's hard to tell through the bottle what the color is, so doing this is very helpful. Here's a look at the different colors of Tim Holtz alcohol ink. If you want to, you can hit pause at any time for a closer look. The ones that I'm pointing to are the colors that I seem to reach for the most and that I feel work well together. Now, as you've probably noticed, I've done many alcohol ink videos recently. I'm just really loving the creativity that you can have with them, and I'm thankful that Tim Holtz has kind of brought them back to the market again. I did alcohol inks maybe 20 years ago when I started stamping, and it's fun to bring them back. I will link to several of those videos that I've done if you're interested in learning more about using these. Now, I will say you don't need all of these colors. Obviously, many of them are very similar, so just get one color from each color family and you can create new colors with those and really have fun creating backgrounds. Now, there are also the metallic mixatives, and those are the last ones that I'll show you here. These include gold, silver, copper, gunmetal, rose gold, pearl, and then there's also snowcap and black or pitch black. You can see those mixatives have a lot of shine to them, and you just want to use those along with any colors that you may have. Okay, there's another way to use your alcohol ink and ways to add details to the backgrounds you create. I link all of the supplies in my YouTube description below. If you're interested, you can check out the videos in the middle there. Go to my blog if you want more photos of all of these cards. I appreciate you spending time with me, and I'll see you again very soon. Have a great day.